You're good deal, Councillor.
Okay. Good evening, everyone, and welcome to the West End Budget Consultation. My name's Jenna Sudds. I am the City Councillor for Kanata North, and I'll pass it around the screen for my colleagues here to introduce themselves as well. Over to you, Glenn.
Thank you. Yes, I'm Glenn Gower, joining from Stittsville. Hi, everybody.
Hi, I'm Allan Hubley from Kanata South. Thank you for joining us tonight.
Excellent. And Wendy, would you like?
Thank you very much, Councillor Sudds. My name's Wendy Stephanson. I'm the CFO here at the City of Ottawa.
Fantastic. And thank you for being here, Wendy. And I believe as well that our colleague from West Carleton, Eli Elshantiri, is with us as well tonight. Thanks for joining, Eli.
Thank you. Thank you for hosting.
Pleasure. So for tonight, I'm proposing an agenda that involves, first and foremost, if any of my colleagues would like to say any welcoming words, and then we'll pass it to Wendy, who's going to run us through a few slides and kind of warm us up, give us a primer on what's involved with developing the budget for this upcoming year. Following that, we did put out a survey. The three West End councillors here put out a survey to residents, and we will share back with you briefly kind of the high-level themes that we saw in those responses, and then we'll open it up to questions. So no matter what platform you are on, whether you're on my Facebook, on Councillor Hubley's or Councillor Gower's, or any of the other platforms, I believe we're on 7 different platforms at the moment, feel free to share your questions, and we will do our best to answer them when we get to that section. So with that, either Councillor Gower or Councillor Hubley, would you like to say anything before we turn it over to Wendy?
Not me. I'm ready to go right to the presentation. Thank you, though.
Well, yeah, I think we want to get right to the content of the meeting. But thanks to everybody who's filled out the survey and who has sent feedback already about the budget, and looking forward to tonight's session.
Excellent. So Wendy, I guess we'll turn it over to you. And I believe there's some slides we will get up here for you. In the meantime, we can turn our screens off and give all the attention to Wendy and her slides.
Thank you so much, councillors, and welcome to everyone who's here tonight. I know the slides are being pulled up right now, and as I said, my name's Wendy Stephanson. I'm the CFO here at the City of Ottawa, and I have overall responsibility for the team that pulls together the budget for the city. And tonight, as Councillor Sudds alluded to, what I'd like to do is give you a bit of a preview in terms of what it is to look like in terms of pulling the budget together, understanding its composition, the process, and ways in which you can provide input into that. You can flip to the next slide, please. So there's an overarching framework for determining how much needs to be collected from taxes for city services and basically to pay for those city services. And we work backwards from a tax target, really to build up that number. And it's really best to start with that tax target to make sure that our budgets remain affordable. So things we have to look at is estimating and determining any increases that we have to expenditures that result from inflation, cost of living increases or changes in regulations or legislation that impact our expenses, or changes in costs to maintain our assets. We also look at growth to service new neighborhoods and changes in funding from other levels of government. And I think very unique to 2021 are the impacts that we're going to see on the city with respect to our response to COVID-19. We're still very much in the thick of it, and we're going to have increased expenses to provide those services to our residents in a very safe and secure manner, as well as we're going to see some decreased revenues as some of our services are a bit slower to return to full services. So things like our transit and our parks and recreation services. We then offset those expenses by savings from efficiencies. So things that can be achieved from changes in our operations, increases in some of our fees that are charged directly to our users for city services, as well as taxes from new assessment that help pay for increased operating and infrastructure costs to service our new neighborhoods. So basically, if you look at the bottom left of this slide, you'll see that our expenditures minus our revenues basically equal the taxation that's required, and that's property taxation. You can flip to the next slide, please. So breakdown of 2020 in terms of our total expenditures, our overall operating budget for 2020 was $3.76 billion. And you'll see that close to 60% of the operating budget is made up of 4 key services. So water and sewer, police services, our transit, and community and social services. And although we're not on the next slide, but you will see on the next slide, very much of the revenue from these services comes from sources other than property taxes. Water and sewer is paid by revenue that's collected through our water bill, and half of our transit operating costs are paid by fare revenue. And approximately 80% of our community and social services are paid by provincial and federal funding. Roughly 9% of the operating budget goes towards capital cash reserves that really help pay for our infrastructure, renewal, and the growth. And then the remaining 31% of the budget covers all of our other services that are delivered by the city. You can flip to the next slide, please. So here you'll see that about just over 50% of our revenue comes from taxes, as well as payment in lieu of taxes. And payment in lieu of taxes is payments that we receive from the federal government for the properties that they own here in the city of Ottawa. Another 19% comes from federal and provincial grants, and 25% from fees and charges, such as the water bill, transit fares, and parks and recreation fees. You can flip to the next slide, please. So this is a snapshot of our capital program for 2020. You can see that the capital budget was $813 million. The high asset intensive areas are really focused in the water and sewer services, our transit, and our transportation, which includes our roads. 66% of the capital budget for tax supported services is for the renewal or replacement of aging infrastructure. And on the rate side, for water and sewer, approximately 84% of that is for renewal of assets. The remainder is for growth, which is primarily funded by development charges or other regulatory or strategic initiatives. And what you don't see here included in this, this pie chart is the total of the projects that are of strategic importance that are approved as part of the budgeting process. But they're not approved as part of the budgeting process, but they require a separate report and approval from council. So a couple of really good examples of that would be our light rail or our central library. You can flip to the next slide, please. So this is a snapshot of the funding by source for our 2020 capital program. And you can see that approximately 68% of this funding comes from our cash reserves that we put aside as a capital contribution from our operating budget. And the remainder of the capital program is funded by debt or other levels of government and the development charges that we collect. You can flip to the next slide, please. So this slide shows there's very little discretion to reduce spending for many of the city services that we do offer. The police budget is tabled separately, and council doesn't have the discretion to make line item changes. They can only approve or reject the budget in its entirety. Budget reductions in other areas like transit or fire or paramedics and roads have to be accompanied by changes in the service standards, which are set and approved by council. There's also a long list of services or expenditures where there's no discretion because these services are mandated, regulated, or they're mandatory. So things like our long-term care, our public health, our housing, and our debt charges. And there's a little bit more discretion in areas that are funded by fees, where the fees can be increased to recover the cost of delivering that service, or where there's no specific service standard for the service standard associated with that, or for areas such as our administrative support services. You can flip to the next slide, please. So this slide outlines our 2021 budget directions, which were approved by Council in earlier October. And Council approved the budget directions, which set our municipal tax target at 3%. And that includes an increase in our citywide levy of 2.5%. An increase for Ottawa Police Services levy at 3%. And I think what's important to note there, their levy is at 3%, and they are responsible for their own capital program. They don't partake in the city's capital, and that's why their levy sits at 3%, because it's all inclusive of capital. For transit, there's an increase of 4.6%, and that includes a $5 million increase to the contribution of capital due to the cancellation of the provincial gas tax program. We've set our target for additional taxation revenues from growth at 1.5%, and our water, sewer, and stormwater program will see an overall increase of 4.8% in the revenue. Our user fees and our charges will increase in accordance with our fiscal framework and our long-range financial plan, as well as including an incremental COVID cost recovery this year. And the capital budget will be developed in accordance with the direction outlined in our 2019 development charges study, as well as our long-range financial plan and our fiscal framework. You can flip to the next slide, please. So budget directions were approved on October the 14th, and public consultations are taking place throughout October. All of our budgets will be tabled with Council and the various boards and commissions on November the 4th. And basically from that date forward to December the 8th, the individual budgets for each of the committee, boards, and commissions are reviewed. And it's at these meetings that the public has another opportunity to provide feedback and input on the budget via public delegations. And then the budget will go to Committee of the Whole and Council on December 9th for adoption. And this year, individual committees still have the flexibility to make recommendations on budget changes that could be funded from reductions in other committee budgets. And final approval of these recommendations will be made at Committee of the Whole and Council on December 9th. And you can flip to the next slide, please. So this is a list of all the budget meetings at which public delegations can provide input and recommendations. And this list can be found on the city's website and will be updated if there are any changes. And you can flip to the next slide. So there's several resources available to you and ways that you can provide input into the budget throughout the year. And these are all available on the city's website. Engage Ottawa provides a comprehensive online engagement platform that allows you to connect with the city in a very interactive manner. To provide input, you can also complete the online survey or send an email to budget@ottawa.ca, or feel free to contact your councillor. All the feedback is appreciated, it's reviewed and considered, and your participation in the public meeting today is greatly appreciated. I look forward very much to hearing about your priorities this evening and answering any questions that you may have. I'll pass it back to the councillors now. Thank you so much.
Terrific. Thank you very much, Wendy. Just 1 second, we'll get Allan back here as well. There we are. Excellent. So what I propose now is just to spend a few minutes sharing back with everyone the feedback that we received through the survey that myself, Councillor Gower, and Councillor Hubley put together and shared with our communities. So overall, we had 490 responses. Which I think is a good start. You're still all encouraged to participate. It is still open, and those links are available through our websites. But a good subset that I think gives us some really good information. So one of the questions that we asked was, do you think your property taxes are too high, too low, about right? And interesting, the responses came back, 49% felt they were too high, and 43% felt they were about right, with the remainder thinking too low. So an interesting split there. The next question was services like transit, recreation, and childcare. are paid for using a mix of city revenues, user fees, and cost sharing. So the question was, do you feel like the fees you pay for city services are too high, too low, or just right? And on this question, we had 51% of people responded about right, which is an interesting majority, with 34% saying too high, and the remainder saying too low. So an interesting breakdown. The next question was, first, the statement that in recent years, the city's approach has been to tie any tax increases roughly to the rate of inflation. And the question was, how do you feel about this approach? The responses to this, again, it was agree or disagree. And agree came back at 61% of respondents feeling like tying any tax increases roughly to inflation was the right approach. The next question, where is the city not spending enough money? You can imagine there was a variety of answers that came back from 490 people, but very clearly a few themes. And the first was investments in roads. So building of roads and maintenance of roads, as well as, maintenance of sidewalks. Next was snow clearing, followed by investments in transit to the west. So some very clear majority on those answers. The next question was, where is the city spending too much money? So on this, interestingly enough, the response, the top response, there's two really, was transit and LRT. And the next one was police. A couple more questions here I'll share with you. So how does Ottawa compare to other cities, or what can Ottawa learn from cities where you've lived or visited? So there was really a variety of answers here, but there were some clear themes around transit. So looking to other cities to learn some best practices that have happened in other cities. As well as a desire for more green space. So looking to other cities who have done that really well. And then lastly, a theme around pedestrian-friendly streets as well. And then the next question was, what service areas should the city be investing more money? Where would you like to see the city invest more money? So the first one was road and pathway maintenance. So that ties back to one of those first questions around your priorities. So very consistently telling us roads and paths, sidewalks are important. And next to that was investing more in community facilities and parks, pedestrian and cycling infrastructure, followed by emergency services, which was by law, fire, paramedic. So some great areas to point to when we think about how we should be investing in our city. So two last questions I'll share for your interests. So the next question was, first, the statement that COVID is putting major financial pressures on all municipalities, including Ottawa. So the question was, how would you like the city to make up for financial shortfalls? And there was a few options given, which would include reducing services, increasing taxes, borrowing from reserves, or other solutions. And two major themes came out in the responses. The first being borrow from reserves. That's what they're there for in cases of emergency, which I would suggest a pandemic probably qualifies. So that was the most popular response, followed by finding efficiencies within city operations, as well as cutting services and increasing enforcement. And then the very last question we asked you, what's your #1 budget priority for the community? And again, quite clear, investments in roads and infrastructure. both building new and maintaining were the clear winners there. So with that, again, on behalf of all of us, thank you to the 490 people who responded to the survey. I think there's some great insights for all of us as your councillors and representatives in the West End, as we are working with our colleagues on the budget. It certainly helps us to understand what your priorities are. Maybe I'll pass it over before we move to questions. Is there anything either yourself, Councillor Gower, or Councillor Hubley you'd like to add?
I'm unmuting here. There we go. Yeah, really interesting responses. The one thing I wanted to add too is we did do this budget survey over the last 2 or 3 weeks. And as Wendy outlined, we're going through a number of committees in the next month or so where we're going to take delegations and hear feedback. But one thing I wanted to mention is at the city, the budget process is really, it never stops. Like we're always gathering feedback from residents. So like the moment that this budget gets passed later on this fall, we'll already start to be thinking about even the next year. So the feedback right now is really useful too, but so are all of the emails and inquiries and the conversations that we have with residents on an ongoing basis throughout the year. It's how we listen and try to understand where people's priorities are and what we need to do to keep the city running.
I would agree with my colleagues, and I really appreciate the responses to the survey, because I would say it's very in line with what I've read in emails or phone messages or talking to people throughout the year. I think this lines up very well with the priorities that people express. So I have a lot of confidence in the data. Thank you.
Terrific. Thank you both. So now is really the opportunity for you at home to share your questions with us, either to us individually or obviously both Wendy and Stefan are with us from City Finance to help answer any questions. The budget is, of course, it's a complex process, a complex document, but it is a great opportunity tonight to get your questions answered or provide feedback. So with that, I'm just going to take a peek here and see, excuse me. Okay, so I think first we will go to, I see Trevor Hache has his hand up. We go to Trevor.
Thank you. Good evening. I live in Kanata South, and you all have the unfortunate position to be familiar with who I am. But I want to wish everybody a good evening tonight. And I just wanted to ask a question about the request that over 300 individuals and 88 organizations have sent in related to the need for the city to address the housing and homelessness emergency, and specifically if the 3 councillors on the call are in support of the community's demands for $20 million of city money above and beyond federal and provincial grants to build new affordable housing near rapid transit stations. So that's question 1. And question 2 is, given the survey feedback, if I understood correctly, indicated people feel like we're spending too much money on police. What, if anything, do you think can be done about that in the budget? Because there's a lot of people very concerned about police brutality that has led to the death of numerous people in Ottawa in recent years. And numerous groups of Black and Indigenous people and others are calling for changes to the police budget to invest in other more positive things, community responses to some of the challenges that our society faces. Thank you.
Thank you, Trevor. I'm happy to maybe start with the first question. Is housing and homelessness falls under the committee that I chair, Community and Protective Services. So I've had the privilege for the last few years of working very closely with staff on some of these issues. and not too long ago passed the city's 10-year housing and homelessness plan. So specific to your question regarding investments in affordable housing, I think that this is something that both the community, individuals and organizations that you're involved with, Trevor, have certainly been advocating for. I think we've seen in the last two budgets that the city has come forward and invested substantial amounts in affordable housing. Now that we have the 10-year housing and homelessness plan finalized and submitted to the province, I know Wendy is working on the long-term financial plan for housing, which is quite exciting. But I do support continued investment through this budget in affordable housing, and I'm cautiously optimistic that we'll see that investment again this year. It's certainly something that I think is definitely needed in our city. And I know I'll have to, with my Kanata North hat on, not my chair hat, I'm also really excited to see the Ottawa Community Housing investment in our seniors residents, OCH residents here in Kanata North for seniors. They've recently began the legwork to begin a project to expand their current location on Penfield here in Kanata North, which is certainly well positioned and needed in our community, and specifically serving seniors as well. I know there was a second part, which in part we addressed at council today. I don't know if one of my colleagues want to take that one. Glenn or Allan?
Glenn raised his hand.
Okay.
Yeah, well, it's a complex topic. So actually, I heard the police chief this morning, Peter Slowly, on CBC Radio, and if anyone listening is interested in the issues of how police are evolving, and specifically how Ottawa police may be evolving over the next few years, I would really encourage people to look up that interview. Chief Slowly speaks so passionately and so effectively on this topic. Today at council, we passed a motion to support some direction that the Ottawa Police Board took earlier this week. And basically, as a council, we endorsed the police board's approach to going out to the public and doing a broad range of consultations in the community around issues around policing and mental health. So there's a lot of work happening right now. The other thing that we're going through as a city is the Community Safety and Wellbeing Plan. This is a new tool that the province is allowing cities, I guess, to undertake, and it's about setting the priorities around community safety. I'm going to simplify it at the risk of simplifying it too much. It's taking, I guess, the prioritization of community safety initiatives out of the police and putting into the hands of city councils and community stakeholders, which is a really significant change. In terms of what Trevor was asking around the budget, my thought is, I don't think you can just take money in a budget and take it out or move it without having a plan in place first about where that money is going to go and what kind of difference it's going to make. We have this plan and this consultation underway around how community safety funding might change, how it might shift from the police to other organizations. And we're already working on a number of community safety and prevention initiatives. But I think to just shift money without having an actual reason or plan behind it might not have the effects that people are looking for. All that said, I think it's pretty clear from the decision at council today that we are very welcome, encouraging. We all want to see some change, and we know that we need to evolve how we approach this in our city.
Terrific. Excellent. Did you want to add to that, Allan, or shall I move?
No, I fully agree with what's been said. Like we talked about it today. I guess I could add to it that I'm not hearing from the community out here, as I'm sure neither of you are either, that they want any less policing in our wards. So I don't think that's where the cuts can come from. I do, of course, I've done a lot of work on the mental health initiatives, and do believe that police need more training or more supports. In fact, it could be mental health professionals that actually attend calls with police officers. I know there's pilots with that happening in our city and others, and so far seems to be providing very positive outcomes. And so I support that. But to just go in and hive off funding from the police, I'm not in support of that. I think as Councillor Gower said, I think the police chief has been very good at explaining why that's not the right approach to take right now. So that's what I would add to it. Thank you.
Terrific. Thank you, Councillor Hubley. So I will go now to Michelle Herchebus. And I'm just, I believe, giving you. Are you there, Michelle?
You've successfully unmuted me, Jenna. Yes, thank you very much.
Fantastic.
Just to kind of pick up and build upon that a little bit in terms of knowing that the impact of COVID-19 has had a huge impact on individuals on accessing social services, and the demands on those supports have been exponentially increasing and continuing to increase throughout the pandemic. And so respecting that the city is in a tough financial place, I think my first question is, how do you continue to support social service-based organizations and continue to respond to this increased demand, particularly around things like food security? So I think the housing is one that, you know, there is a plan and there is some movement on that, but the particular concern about food security and mental health supports not being adequately funded and resourced. And then the second comment I want to make in terms of the police services that you've talked about, I am actually quite concerned about mental health being criminalized with the police response. And so I do, in terms of when we have a mental health crisis and our response is to send in police to respond and take action in that it does have this effect of criminalizing mental health behaviors. And so I do think while there is an importance around training, there is actually we need resources that aren't just about police. And I appreciate what you're saying, Councillor Gower, about needing to have a plan related to that. My concern right now is that social service agencies across the whole city are being asked to partner with police so that they can divert people to social service agencies. We love when police are wanting to work in a community-based way and do that, but we actually have no capacity to work in partnership with them. So the efforts are going to fail if there isn't also the supports and investment made to be able to work in partnership with the police in a different way. And so, you know, my challenge to council would be to think about ways of being able to fund and support that kind of partnership work. Thank you.
Terrific. Thank you, Michelle. Maybe I'll turn it over to either of my colleagues first. I don't want to always be the first one to speak here. Oh, Alan's muted.
Okay, did that
There we
work?
go. Yep.
Oh, great. Yeah, good points, and thank you for that, Michelle. Food security, well, that I think would fall more under Jenna's committee, so I'll let her take that one if she doesn't mind. But the capacity to work with the police on the mental health issues, that's a very good point. I think, at least from my perspective and from people I've spoken to at different levels of government about this initiative, there's an understanding that there will have to be funding to provide capacity. It's just a matter, right now, it's more like pilot projects where they're trying to see what will work. And then once they have a model that works, going forward and getting stable funding for, you know, we can't just fund it for a year. It's going to have to require long-term funding, and long-term may only be 5 years to get started, but certainly beyond that as well, in order for agencies like yourselves to be able to work with the police on this, because I think there's a clear consensus that status quo isn't enough, that we have to do something more than what we're doing today on that. I hope that gives you some comfort that your points are recognized.
If I could, maybe actually Wendy Stephanson might be able to give us some concrete numbers. But well, first of all, I know in this pandemic, we've seen a massive mobilization of city resources into the social services area. In some cases, staff being moved from one department to another, because that's where we see the priorities. But we've also been getting regular injections of funding from the province to help with emergency shelters, to help with outreach to disadvantaged people in our community. But Wendy, do you have any, just kind of an overview of the kinds of ways that the province is supporting municipalities with funding for social services?
You're going to challenge me on my remembering all of the numbers, but yes, there has been millions of dollars that have been injected. I believe the first installment of the Social Services Relief Fund was $13.4 million. And we've just received confirmation this week about another $17.1 million that's been injected into the city to go towards all kinds of those things, as well as, sharing that funding with some of the agencies around the city. We've also diverted human resources, so people throughout the city. So we're going through the pandemic and services were shutting down. I want to say at a peak, we've taken, almost 900 resources, and they've gone off to help social services, long-term care. They've been to public health as well, to really lend a hand in terms of the outreach and providing those services to across the city.
Thank you.
Terrific. And are you good, Glenn? I don't want to interrupt. Yeah, okay. I did just want to comment as well on the food insecurity piece. And Michelle, I know you're very involved with the work of the Human Needs Task Force. But from early on, food insecurity was identified as one of the main areas of focus for the efforts of the task force. And of course, more recently, mental health has also been very much front and center. So as Wendy alluded to, there has been some funding that has come through the province and the federal government to help support these efforts. And, our hope and aspiration is that support continues, as we know that we need to be supporting the most vulnerable in our community, be that housing needs, be that food insecurity, or be that mental health issues. So I certainly appreciate you raising it, Michelle, and acknowledging that there are a lot of pressures there. But I hope through the continued work of the Human Needs Task Force and the many partners across the city that we'll be able to continue to meet those needs. So I will go ahead, Glenn.
Well, I was just going to ask, because I'm seeing a bunch of questions coming in on our Facebook live feed, and could I jump in with one of those? They're both about transit. Both about transit. Allan Hubley is the chair of the Transit Commission, and Jen and I both sit on it. There's two sort of themes to them. One is about stage 3 LRT. Now, this is looking a bit beyond this year's budget, but the question basically is, what is the plan? How is the city going to pay for stage 3 LRT? I'm going to answer that quickly, which is our ask is to the federal and provincial government to each cover 50% of the cost for stage 3 LRT, which would bring LRT out to Kanata and Stittsville eventually. We don't know the timing of that, and certainly COVID-19 has impacted that. There's questions in every level of government as to when infrastructure money will be available, but I did hear the mayor today say that stage 3 LRT, which includes Kanata and Stittsville, is his #1 transit priority and the #1 transit priority of the city. The other question, and Allan, I'll let you answer this because you like to deliver good news, I think. The question is, when is OC Transpo going to install barriers to properly protect their drivers from COVID and from assault?
Well, as you know, before I do answer that, Glenn, I want to touch on the phase 3 funding. I think the reason I asked that question of the mayor today and asked him to give us a clear indication that phase 3 is still a priority and that he is asking other levels of government to be ready to fund phase 3. And I was very happy that he gave us that one word answer. Yes, it's what I think everybody wanted to hear. Locally, well, for Jenna and I, we share an MP and an MPP that are both in government. Mary Lee, our MPP, is a minister in government, and I believe a member of Treasury Board as well. And they're both, and Karen McCriven is our MP, both have been fantastic champions for LRT. Residents may recall that it was Karen that went and got the funding so that we could do the environmental assessment to fast track LRT to Kanata. It's in the scheme of LRT AS, if you compare it to phase 1 or phase 2, it's a lot more affordable. It's less than, I believe it was less than $1 billion. And some of that are costs that we may even be able to work a bit with when it goes out to actual contract. There's savings there by building the facility in Kanata instead of at Moody if we make the decision soon enough. So I'm optimistic that phase 3 will come along. Certainly COVID is delayed, will cause some sort of a delay. I don't think it's a delay that puts it out of reach of our lifetimes, which I can tell you in 2010 when I got elected, LRT to Kanata was considered beyond most of our lifetimes. In the Transportation Master Plan, they weren't even going to look at it until 2031. And here we're not even into 2021 yet, and we've got the EA, the routes, everything approved. It's just a matter of waiting for phase 2 to catch up to the point that we can start it. So I just wanted to add to that I think it's there. I think it's also very important to note that our council colleagues agreed to the 3 of us being on the Transit Commission to make sure that we help keep phase 3 as a priority. So I think that's worth noting. On the second question on the barriers, it was interesting discussion at Transit Commission last week. I think I've heard from a number of residents across the city that were actually quite shocked that 2 commissioners would vote against installing the barriers now. And so we're going to have to see how this goes in the budget discussion, because that's the next step for the barriers. Hopefully it gets the funding gets approved to install the barriers in the existing buses, with the exception of the ones that are about to be retired in the next little while. We won't install barriers there, but certainly I know Wendy's probably ready with the checkbook if we get that approved, and we'll do it because it's a safety issue. It's, as we heard at the commission, there was over 100 officers, operators that actually reported assaults. And I want to be the first to tell you there's assaults that don't get reported too. And so it's very, very important that we move on these barriers as quickly as possible. Thank you. Happy to answer any other questions. And Jenna, I'm not going to mute myself so that we don't get into the trouble of trying to get unmuted. So if you don't mind,
yep,
I'll stop talking. But
works well. Okay. So I'll go back then. I see Amanda. I will see if I can give you access here, Amanda.
Hi.
Fantastic.
Hi. I don't think you can see me at all, but I'm Amanda and I'm a parent. You might hear my 5-year-old in the background as he's rolling around here. And I'm wondering, I have sort of a pressing concern and a less pressing concern. So my pressing concern is, I think probably you've heard about Tunney's, Galtoggy Tunney's Daycare, which is closing because of, I think it's a combined problem of suddenly having to pay a really high rent but also because of COVID. So we know that COVID's not going to last forever. And I think that Tunney's it's probably an example of what's happening to childcare everywhere in Ottawa, where numbers are down. Parents can't afford to pay for childcare if they're not using it. But I think a lot of folks are hesitant to send their kids to group childcare, and centers are lowering their numbers. But childcare is something that it's really important, and this is only it's not going to be forever. So I would like to know what you councillors think about how you're going to support childcare in Ottawa in the short term and during this pandemic, so that we can get through this time, and how you hope to, I'd like to hear that you hope to expand municipal childcare programs into your areas of the city as well.
Okay, I don't mind giving this a bit of a shot. So childcare does fall under the Community and Protective Services Committee that I chair. Many things do. So all that to say, I believe actually tomorrow I'm meeting with Childcare Now, which is an advocacy group on behalf of childcare providers in our city. I do meet with organizations like them on a pretty regular basis to be able to hear directly what their concerns and their challenges are. Last week or week prior, I was also on a call with a task force that's been set up through our manager of childcare services at the city. Again, with that aim of being able to work collaboratively to help address some of these issues. We do have, as you mentioned, some municipal childcare centers, not a lot in the city, but there are some. There is one in my ward here in Kanata North. And we've done our best throughout the pandemic to ensure that they were closed for a while, yes, but when they did reopen, that they were safe places, and they have fared pretty well throughout. All that to say, I can't tell you that I have an immediate fix, but I can tell you that we are working collaboratively with the sector to try to support them as best we can. Childcare is obviously is a much needed necessity for so many across the city. So it is something that we need to make sure survives and thrives beyond this this pandemic.
Maybe if I could add, Jenna, you know, beyond what the municipality, what our city can do, I would certainly encourage parents who have concerns about childcare and the sustainability of childcare spaces and facilities to contact your MPPs as well, because they certainly set a lot of the regulations and the rules and even the funding sources that the city relies on for this. So you know, I'll make a note, something that I'll raise with next time I'm having a conversation with our MPP. But I know this is a really difficult time, whether you're a public childcare provider or a private childcare provider, with COVID-19 making it even more difficult. So thanks for the question.
Mm-hmm.
I'm a believer in subsidy versus municipal run daycares. I think we can help more families by using subsidies, because often all families need is helping hand and not necessarily just a handout. And so I know there's daycares in our communities. I know I have some in my community that are not at capacity and need support to keep going. I think that's important infrastructure that we have to keep in place. I certainly, you know, Jenna, you would know more, but I'm pretty certain you're not cutting the subsidy budget or not expected to be cutting the subsidy budget as part of the 2021 budget. So the supports will be there for families for daycare, and I think everybody around the council table knows how important that is. So thank you for the question.
Wendy, you wanted to add?
Yeah, if you don't mind, One of the things I think that's really important here is that the federal government realizes how important childcare is in terms of our response and getting through COVID. And it's one of those foundational pieces, much like transit and other things. And what they've done is they have given us some money to flow through to some of the not-for-profit agencies of which we have a contract with to help for some of those costs associated with COVID. So where we've got additional pressures, or the childcare providers have additional pressures for PPE and reduced sizes of class, there will be an allocation that will be going out in the next couple of weeks. So just to share that with you too.
Thanks. I do know, I am aware that there is some extra funding that's coming through, but I'm concerned about the impact of low enrollment. I think that the impact of low enrollment right now is that I think we're going to see more centers closing. And I'd really like to know that the city is advocating for protection of those centers and doing all that they can to ensure that they don't close, because we'll need that childcare in a few months. And I think we all want it to be there.
Where there's a need, there'll always be a service provider for that. What I think we have to realize here, Amanda, is that nobody knows for sure what next year and the year after is going to bring. If the federal government, for example, moves towards a work from home model, or what they call a hoteling model, where people just go in one day a week or whatever, that has huge impacts on daycare providers, transit programs, all kinds of programs. So we can't give you a guarantee today, at least I'm not willing to. I'm sure my colleagues would have trouble with giving you a guarantee today that we will subsidize all the, or use municipal tax dollars to keep daycare providers open if there's no families that need them.
And I would add as well that the childcare annual plan is coming. The city's childcare services annual plan is coming to Community and Protective Services Committee early in next year. So there will be a plan put forward and some more discussion around how to support that in our city then.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. Okay, I am going to go, I see a question here for Wendy. It's from Jeff McNamee. So Wendy, the question says, you have identified 128 million of deferred capital projects. So the question is, are these scheduled to be reinstated in 2021, given the high debt?
So Jeff, I think you're probably talking about a report that went to Committee and Council for Transit and for the general tax stream, where we recommended, I want to say, the deferral of 33 projects overall. And that was really a mitigation that we put in place in terms of filling our deficit and our gap should we not get funding from the Safe Restart Agreement. So those have been deferred. My understanding is that we're not going to be picking them up in 2021, and we'll be relooking at that again in 2021, just to see where we're at with respect to, I'm going to say, COVID and our response and our budgetary pressures that we have for 2021. If we have the ability, I'm going to say, if we recover and we don't need to access that money, then those will be back on the table.
Excellent. Thank you, Wendy. And there was a second question here, which was directed to Allan. And the question was that with the transportation master plan delayed, will transit plans be revisited given the expected drop in ridership while people are working from home?
Yes, that works will be done. There's some efforts already underway to, it goes to the response I gave a moment ago on daycares. We have to see what 2021 is going to look like and 22 and beyond. if there's a major shift in where people go to work, whether they work from home, however that's going to look like, that will impact the transit plans. Currently, and Wendy can correct me if I'm wrong, but we have, through the Safe Start Agreement, we know that we're going to be getting funding for the second half of this year. We just have to provide, basically show receipts for what we spent, really. And the province and the feds have said that they will be making us whole again on that. We know we have federal funding through to the end of March of 2021, correct? I see Wendy nodding her head. So until we know what's beyond that, there isn't a plan to do a huge change. I know some councillors are talking about layoffs already. We're not there. We're not looking at that yet.
Terrific. Thank you, Alan. And now I see a question for Glenn. So Glenn, a question regarding Carp Road widening. With a lot more people working in Stittsville now, and the city collecting fees from new communities being built in Stittsville, will Carp Road be widened?
So right now, Carp Road is not in the next 3 or 4 years. It's a longer term project. There's another major road project in Stittsville that's ahead of the priority list, which is Robert Grant Avenue. Most people in Stittsville and Kanata will know Robert Grant right now is built only from Fernbank Road to Abbott Street. And the plan is to build that road all the way up to the Queensway. So it'll be the major north-south arterial road running basically parallel to Terry Fox, so a second Terry Fox in essence. Both of those projects are on the city's priority list. We are working to get both of them moved up sooner. And both of them are funded through what's called development charges, which is any new home or commercial space that's built in the city. There's a extra fee that the builder, the developer pays, and that's intended so that growth can pay for growth, so that the existing tax base, existing residents aren't paying for the infrastructure for new communities. The challenge we have right now is we have a lot of projects across the whole city that are funded by development charges, and we are behind. We could spend probably a whole hour talking about why that might be. And in fact, if you check my YouTube page, you can find a video about that. It's called Can't We Just Stop the Growth? But we are behind. We don't have enough money in the budget to move forward with a number of projects like Robert Grant and Carp Road. But we're looking for solutions on how to move them up the priority list and how to make up for the gaps in funding that we have. I agree with, I think, what most residents agree, that we'd like to see when there's a new neighborhood being built, we would like to see all the infrastructure and amenities being built as close to the time of the housing being built as possible. And what we see in all sorts of communities, in Stittsville, Kanata, Barrhaven, Orleans, we see a lot of the infrastructure lagging several years behind people moving into the community. We've got to fix that.
Can I just add something to that as well? I'm very supportive of what Glenn's talking about with Robert Grant Road, because Robert Grant will run parallel to Terry Fox for those folks that are in Kanata and have been here for a while. We're seeing a lot of traffic on Terry Fox. That the expectation from our traffic experts is that a lot of that traffic will move to Robert Grant once it's completed. So I've been working with Glenn as very supportive of his efforts to get it advanced. I know, Glenn, I thought you were very close to a front-ending agreement to advance some of that road work as well. And for the benefit of those listening, that's where Glenn has talked to developers and asked them if they would pay for the road in advance, and the city will pay them back when the development charges come in to get the road done. It's a common practice as a way to get infrastructure in place before people actually move in. And a road is a great piece of infrastructure to get before people come into the community. So I applaud Glenn's efforts on getting that done. Thank you.
I was just trying to look in my email because I can't find it, but I've got I've got a summary of how much in development charges has been collected in Kanata and Stittsville over the past 5 years. And it's in the tens of millions, if not low hundreds of millions of dollars. I think, the challenge is that the cost of construction keeps going up as well. So when something might have been budgeted as a $10 million road project 10 years ago, that cost has ballooned for a number of reasons. So it's a big puzzle to solve, but I've got this list of priorities up on my wall for Stittsville over my 4-year term, and Robert Grant and Carp Road are on the top of that list. So this is something we're working on every day in my office.
Mm-hmm. There's a related question here, and it's a comment that there seems to have been some roadwork projects happening, potentially fast-tracked over the last few months during COVID. And the question is the city looking to capitalize on the low traffic numbers right now with people working from home and take on more of these road infrastructure projects in the coming year? I can provide a comment for Kanata North. I think we very much benefited in the summer when March Road was repaved, a large section of it, and the traffic counts were marginal. They were just a fraction of what they normally would be. So much so that I didn't receive a single complaint about the construction, which is a bit shocking because it's such a busy road usually. But, I think that's a great example of getting that work done. Now, granted, it was planned. So this wasn't a new project that we took on because we could, because of COVID. But the timing worked out really well. One other one that is progressing nicely in Kanata North is the Campo Road extension. So that's will be connecting from Campo, which will go essentially from Terry Fox back to where the subdivision Arcadia is and the Tanger outlets. And that has continued on full bore throughout COVID and is progressing nicely towards completion at the end of next year, about a year from now. I'm not sure if either of you have any, you've already mentioned a few projects, but if there's any others that you feel are progressing despite or because of COVID.
Well, I'll give a good example. Old Richmond Road, it's been a project that's been underway for a few years. The original target was for by October, November of this year to be done to Moody Drive. And that's where we're 4-laning Old Richmond and Hunt Club through there. Because, and last fall this time, knowing that was going to be the work this spring and summer, I was bracing myself for the amount of complaints that we were going to get because traffic would be so backed up. There's a couple of bus routes that go down that road. I knew those folks were going to be inconvenienced, and I really thought we were going to be dealing, and I know Glenn has a number of residents that commute that way as well. In fact, what the contractor was able to do for us was not only get it done to Moody, but they're almost done all the way to Highway 416, which wasn't even on next year's plan, I don't think. It was the year after that we were expecting to get that far out. So they have made a huge amount of progress so that if we're able to make it safe to go back to work and the commuters can use that road, they're going to be in for a real pleasant surprise when they get on there because it's a big change. So that's a positive that came out of the COVID experience, I would think. Thank you.
There's no road projects in Stittsville that were really affected, but I was thinking about LRT. Over the summer, there were a few, because there was lower ridership, it created the opportunity to be able to close LRT over a few days in order to do some upgrades and repairs. And that probably wouldn't have been possible, or it would have been a major inconvenience for commuters had we had full commuter traffic on there. So, yeah.
Absolutely. Yeah.
Okay, I will go now to Catherine Sutherland on Zoom here. I'm just unmuting you, Catherine. Perhaps. Catherine, if you are still there, you can unmute yourself as well, I believe. No, technology is not.
Can you hear me now, Councillor Sudds?
Oh, there we are. Yes, perfect.
Thank you. And thank you, Councillor Sudds, for recognizing me. My name is Kathy Sutherland. I'm the Executive Director of the National Capital Heavy Construction Association, and I live in Ward 23. As the councillors know, the association represents the heavy construction industry, so that's the sewer and water main contractors and road builders in the National Capital Region. And our industry is a significant economic driver in Ottawa with over 9,000 employees and families that live and work in our community. I was interested to hear that residents identified that building maintenance of roads should be a priority investment. And I'd like to follow up on Jeff's question a few minutes ago regarding deferral of capital projects. In developing the 2021 budget, we asked that the city carefully consider the impact that a reduction in the capital budget or deferral of capital projects will have on the heavy construction industry, its workforce of over 9,000 families, and our community. The projects that we deliver are essential. They provide transportation routes for people and goods. They ensure safe drinking water, process waste, and protect our community against flooding and other natural disasters. This foundation enables our communities and local businesses to grow and ensures that we enjoy a high quality of life. We feel it's in the best interest of Ottawa's economy that the city maintain its capital budget for infrastructure projects, and relying on the construction sector to play a leading role in economic recovery is a time-tested and proven strategy, and one that should be embraced as fundamental to recovery from the COVID-19 pandemic. Ottawa will benefit in the short term from the economic stimulus created by thousands of working construction people, as well as the multiple effect in terms of the economic activity generated through broad and diverse materials and services chain. At the same time, infrastructure construction creates tangible new public assets that will support further economic development and growth in the longer term. Our members believe it's in the best interest of Ottawa that infrastructure construction continue without interruption. And the city's identified that 19% of Ottawa households are currently having difficulty paying for basic needs such as housing and food. And this statistic will worsen if infrastructure work is cancelled or deferred. So for all of these reasons, we urgently call on the City of Ottawa to recognize that deferral or cancellation of infrastructure projects should only be considered as a last resort, and not without consideration of the impact on the industry, its workforce of over 9,000 and their families, and our community. Thank you, Councillor Sudds, for the opportunity to speak.
Thank you. Thank you, Kathy, for the comments. My thought as I was listening to that was actually it highlights how difficult it is sometimes to manage a city budget. Because I've had some suggestions from residents that we cut our city budget by 10% or by 20%. And I mean, these are all things we can do, but any decision we make, deferring capital projects, reducing budgets, it has a direct effect on our economy. It has a direct effect on jobs, has a direct effect on families. So we've got our work cut out for us over the next couple of months to make the most prudent decisions to make sure that we have we're on solid financial footing, but also so that we're still supporting every sector of our economy as much as we can. So thank you for the comments, Kathy.
I see, Kathy, I want to add to that and say, well, thank you for coming out tonight. I appreciate it. And I appreciate the work that your association does for us. There's Jenna back.
Apologies.
I want to say one of the ways that you can ensure that there's a lot of capital spending next year is if your association members get together and decide to offer us a better price on construction, we might be able to leverage that. See, look, I'm getting a smile out of our treasurer, so she's on board. Might be something to consider to do, because we certainly know the value of the work. We also, I think, one of the things I like to talk to residents about is the cost of not doing the repairs and, delaying paving the road next year may mean that it's double the price down the road because the bed of the road and everything is all gone. So we know that our senior managers at City Hall are well aware that we can't stop all the work, that it'll cost us more than it'll save us if we do that. However, if you want to take that back to your members and talk about a discount on asphalt, we may be able to get some more roads paved next year. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Hubley.
Terrific. Thank you, Catherine. Okay, I'm not seeing any more hands up in Zoom. I'll just take a peek and see if there's any other questions here we're missing. I do see a question. I see a question asking about our ability or consideration of freezing property taxes. So the notion that Montreal and Laval, to name a few, have froze property taxes as suggested to support unemployed workers, those with salary freezes, closed businesses due to COVID, etc. This is a bit of a loaded question for sure. I'll take the first stab because I'm sure my colleagues would appreciate it. So first and foremost, I think we do have as a priority trying to keep taxes as affordable as possible for everyone. We're all taxpayers. And we all work hard for every penny that we earn or we have. The challenge that we face as a city is increasing costs due to inflation year over year. Similar to us, as we go out and we buy groceries or we purchase items that we need day to day, those costs have increased over the course of the year due to inflation. Similarly, many of the city's costs have also increased. So it's balancing that as well. I think we can all acknowledge that COVID has certainly created some additional pressures as a city, both from an expenditure side when we think about PPE and changes to how we operate as a city, and we keep people safe. But then also from a revenue point of view, obviously transit revenues being substantially down, as well as from our recreation programs. So on both sides, we certainly have some pressures. So as we go through this exercise, of course, it is our goal to make sure that every penny is spent wisely. That we create a budget that reflects what our residents want and need from us as a city, while doing our best to keep those increases to a reasonable level. Either of my colleagues like to add to?
Absolutely. I want to add to that and say, Wendy, we're lucky to have Wendy with us tonight. She's our treasurer. And I think my colleagues would agree that this year, because of the impacts of COVID, her and Dr. Etches probably have the two toughest jobs at City Hall. And I just want to thank her for the efforts. But I want to answer your question by telling you that I know that Wendy and her team are doing every possible thing they can to keep our expenses down, because the revenue challenges are huge this year. I can tell you that going back to when I was first elected, I was one of the councillors that came in and thought taxes are too high, we have to cut this. Because what I was seeing happening at City Hall before then was they would come out with a budget that was 10 or 12%, and they'd cut it down to 7% tax increase and pat themselves on the back and go on. I thought that was too much. What we've done since we've got in 2010 is we started at annual increases of 2.5. We went down to 2 in the second term I was there. And this term, we all agreed to 3, with the understanding that that 1% increase was to go towards infrastructure spending. So it's a real challenge to keep to that level. One of the things I learned through those years was if you go to a zero or to a negative increase, then you're talking about taking things off the table. You're talking about reducing snow plowing. You're talking about reducing cutting the grass, for example. How many times we cut the grass in parks and pathways and things like that. There's all kinds of areas there that get impacted depending on how deep the cuts are. So the majority of residents that I've spoken to over the years have all agreed that a low as possible tax increase to keep the services going, cover the costs of inflation that is out of our control on those costs, to cover that so that we can maintain the level of service that they're happy with. And they understand that we can't grow those services much higher without actually raising taxes. So I hope that gives you my perspective to it.
Wendy, can I ask, the 3% tax target, do you have the numbers, the calculation at your fingertip? What does that represent for the average home in dollars?
I think it's about $115 a year for an average home across the city.
Okay.
That's an urban home. In the rural area, it's a little bit less. It's about 88.
Okay. Yeah, I think going back to what I was saying earlier, in response to I think it was Kathy's question, it's always a balance. It's always a trade-off for councillors. One of the things a resident asked me recently was, why is Ottawa still running buses at all? And I think I understand the question because buses certainly have a lower ridership. But at the same time, if you look at who's taking the buses right now, these are essential workers, these are part-time workers, these are people who don't have an option to drive. And if we just cut buses, well, yes, that could save maybe millions of dollars. People who we rely on in order to keep our city running won't be able to get to work. So sometimes it might be easy to say make cuts, but there's always consequences to that, and that's what we as councillors have to consider as we're setting a tax rate. So I do think a modest tax increase that's close to inflation is the right approach, and we're always looking for ways to find more efficient ways to save money and make sure we're delivering good services to the public.
I would also encourage people to look at what they get for their municipal tax dollar compared to what they get for their federal or provincial tax dollar. Your municipal tax dollar is probably in the range. Maybe Wendy, you have average housing price and what that cost will be, not just the 115, but what would it be in total for their property tax for next year?
I think, and don't quote me, around 3,700.
So around 3,700, and don't quote Wendy, you can quote me that I heard it somewhere. For that money, you're getting police, fire, paramedics, you're getting your roads cleared, a lot of them are getting paved, traffic lights, buses, you name it. You can't go a day in your life without somehow interacting with the city. I think, you get up in the morning, we're giving you the highest rated drinking water that you can get. When you flush your toilet, we make sure that it leaves your property and it's treated and taken care of. The power, we're the single shareholder in Ottawa Hydro. There's so many different ways that we touch your home as compared to other levels of government. So I think you're getting good value for that 3,700 as compared to probably the $40,000 or $50,000 a year you're paying in federal taxes.
Mm-hmm. Terrific. Well, I'm not seeing any more questions, but I did want to raise one last item for Wendy, and that is just to explain to those joining us tonight the city's ability to run deficits. I think that's an important distinction that not everyone would understand. So maybe if you don't mind just for a moment, just explaining that to everyone.
Yeah, it's a really good question, and I think quite a myth in a sense that's out there. So we cannot legally budget for a deficit. So, I'll go back to that very beginning slide in terms of, what we have to raise in taxation. So we need to make sure that when we table a budget and when we approve a budget, that it's a balanced budget, that we have equal sources of revenue to all of the expenses that we have. That is very unlike the province or the federal government, who can run deficits and they can borrow to be able to fill those holes and fund all of those things. So we're very, very different. I'm in agreement with that because I think it's fiscally prudent for us to do so. And it means that we have to live within the means and within the budget that we develop.
Yeah, I think it's important to raise that because I don't think everyone follows along and understands how we go through this process. It's quite complex, but that's an important distinction for us as a city. And I think particularly now with COVID and the various financial pressures and uncertainty that we're operating in as we try to plan for next year. So with that, I'm not seeing any more questions that have come in. So I think I will wrap it up. I'll pass it to my colleagues, but before I do, on behalf of myself, a big thank you to everyone who has joined us tonight. A thank you to my colleagues for joining me in putting this forward. I think it's been a great discussion. And of course, to yourself, Wendy and Stefan, thank you so much for joining us and presenting and sharing your expertise. I think this is a really important discussion. Obviously, a lot of work goes into drafting this budget and preparing for it. So I do appreciate everyone's time tonight and input. And also for those who filled out the survey. As I mentioned earlier, I think there's some really great insights that have been shared through that. That I think as councillors resonates and is very helpful as we advocate on your behalf and work on behalf of the community. So that's my thanks, and maybe I'll pass it over to yourself, Allan or Glenn.
Sure, I'll be very brief. I echo your comments. I want to thank everybody for coming. I especially want to thank Wendy for taking the time to provide all that detail for people participating so they realize the scope of the numbers we're dealing with. And maybe a special shout out there to our colleague Eli El-Shantiri for joining us tonight too. Didn't say much, but it was great to have him with us. Don't see you enough anymore, buddy. Anyway, thank you all for coming out tonight. Go ahead, Glenn. I'm done.
Yeah, well, thank you to residents. This is the third year that we have done a joint budget meeting like this, and we've had more people participating than we've ever had by far. It's not even a comparison. So thank you to everybody who took an hour and a half out of their busy lives to join us here. Thank you to Wendy and her team for your help tonight, and you've got a busy few weeks ahead of you as well. And thank you, Allan and Eli, and thank you to not only Jenna, but Jenna Sudds' team, who really took the lead in putting the survey together and tonight's session together, and really happy that everybody could join us. Have a good night.
Excellent. Thank you, everyone. Have a great night.
Good night.